All right, back at it on the SuccessFlow podcast, and today we're not even gonna try to avoid sports. That we're tying it back, trying to make these relevant for our listeners. But there's been some things going on in the sports world that we were rapping about, and really applies to the personal side of life and what these athletes are going through and how they're handling it. We thought, hey, let's jump on and talk about this and connect the dots as we go. So how you doing, Steven? Ready to talk some sports?
I'm good. Let's talk some sports. I got my unsports attire on. Unsports, is that a word? I don't know. But I got my button up.
Unsportsmanlike attire?
This is the most dressed up I've been for the pod, but that's the way it goes. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big basketball guy, and obviously there's big news and stuff going on. NBA playoffs are still going on. You got the Celtics going in the finals. By the time this podcast is released, we'll probably have our finals teams going. At this point of this recording, the Wolves have made somewhat of a rallying cry to win one. Who knows? I don't think they'll be able to come back all the way down 0-3, but we'll see if it happens. But outside of that, the actual sports stuff, the biggest news in the sports world, in the NBA at least, is Bronny James and LeBron James and what's going on with the NBA draft, because you got a kid and you got a father-son duo, and you've got LeBron, who wants to fulfill his legacy and his dream of playing at least 1 year with his son. But, LeBron is playing for the Lakers, and he is not tied to them next year. He doesn't have to re-sign, but he's got $50 million on the line. And I actually just got a headline on my phone that says if Bronny James goes somewhere else and LeBron James decides to go with him, he leaves $50 million on the table. LeBron's also on his way to becoming a billionaire if he's not already there. I haven't checked his financials, but he's one of the most wealthiest NBA players of all time. I think it's interesting, though, to have a dynamic, a duo of, LeBron's like, 39 years old. Bronny's 19. So you had him when he was 20 years old. And to be able to have that longevity to play that long in your career, and as a basketball guy, that would be pretty dope. I think it would be a lot of fun and really cool. I'm an advocate for it. I think it would be a great way to go out. But there's talk about them playing on the Suns, and I'm a big Suns fan, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it yet, but it would just be like a quick run to the finals and see if it works. But Bronny's not like a draftable guy. Like he's okay. He had a great combine, but the only reason I think NBA teams would even consider it is if LeBron James comes in a package deal. So it's hard to kind of get a take on it, especially if you're a guy who's going into the draft and you've been working your tail off and potentially you're going to get picked behind Bronny James because of the name. So I just think it's an interesting family dynamic in the sports world you don't see very often.
Yeah, we've been chatting about that in some of our group chats and beyond, and I think it's funny how it ties to this into the stuff we talk about in the podcast. And you have a visualization of exactly what you want, and LeBron has many of the other accolades. He needs some championships, but he wants to play with his son, and he's got that locked in his head, and he's finding a way to do it. Now he has the resources, again, an accomplished career that helps you do that. But it just shows you how we're all still always chasing, no matter what level you're at, you're chasing that ideal state. What do you really want? He's really wanting to play with Bronny. I think it's funny with all of our discussions, if he did wind up on the Suns, you also got to look at the implications of Bronny has to live then with the rest of his life. Sure, he was a first-round pick, but it was because of dad. How does that impact a player's psyche, their emotions? You make a run and go to the playoffs. Oh, yeah, you're only able to do that because of your dad. Those are all things LeBron has to consider.
It's interesting you say that, because the first thing that popped in my head was, where was my first corporate sales job? Was from my dad, right? He had his company, and I came in with no interview. It was just like, here you go, son. Like he was waiting for me to come in. And I remember turning him down for a year. I didn't want to have to do anything with his company because of that stigma and that stereotype of the boss's son. And, but I made that choice, and, the rest is history. But I remember coming in, and Bronny's probably coming in with the same mindset of like, okay, yeah, dad may have gotten me an opportunity, but it's up to me to show up and put in the work and make it happen and make a name for myself, and not. It's only going to last
so long in the NBA, just like at MasterTax or ADP. Like you have to do the work.
Exactly. So just because you've got an opportunity, no matter where it came from, it's going to be temporary unless you make a stamp yourself and make a name for yourself by putting in the work. And, honestly, there's a lot of talk. Obviously, he measured at 6'4" at USC, and then he comes to the combine, he measures at 6'1", so he's a little shorter. They're looking at the measurables and doing all these crazy things. And, that's probably going into his head too. And hopefully he's staying off the internet because there's a lot of, people out there and critics and whatnot. But honestly, I'm rooting for him. I think just from a basketball guy, he's going to get an opportunity that most won't get. But if he can make a name for himself, what a cool story that'll be. If he ends up winning championships on his own 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or whatever, that's a pretty damn good legacy. And it kind of goes back to Del Curry and Steph Curry, right? Steph Curry had the genes. His dad played in the NBA. Did they play together? No. But even though he didn't really get play college anywhere, Davidson was the only school that picked him up. He still had those genes and he still had that lineage that got him into the NBA. And now look what he's doing. He's outpacing his dad. I'm not saying Bronny's going to do that with LeBron. It's a different story. But there's a lot of father-son NBA players. I just don't know. Is this the first kind of its kind where father-son potentially play together? Has that ever happened?
It's been done in baseball, but I don't know about it in basketball. Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't have that longevity in basketball.
The Bonds and the Griffies.
Yeah.
Actually, the Bonds made night up. The Griffies did, I know, which was a big deal. And there's some fun stuff there. But it's going to be really interesting to see which way that one goes. Switching sports on us, one of the things I really wanted to bring up is a little heavier news and hit pretty hard was the loss of Grayson Murray. Grayson Murray's a PGA Tour golfer, won twice on the PGA Tour, which most golfers don't do, even at the professional level. But at the Charles Schwab, he withdrew from the tournament and had been battling issues with depression and alcohol years past. Had been sober, from what I was reading, at least 7-8 months. Was pushing toward a year. He's pretty vocal on social media, trying to be an example of help for folks that were struggling. So very sad news that he withdrew from the tournament. And then I'm not sure how, but he did take his life. And it just shows it's not like he was just on the PGA Tour. He was winning. He was having success in his career. And it's just a reminder, you have no idea what everybody else is going through, whether they're a celebrity, professional athlete or not, or just a person next door, have no idea the war that's going on in their personal life. And when you see it at that level, you could see the reaction from the PGA Tour when they announced it at the tournament. It shook some people up, surprised they didn't suspend play a little bit longer. But just a really somber moment and a reminder for, empathy with other people, because no one's showing you what they're truly going through. And this was obviously an example of that.
Yeah, that was he was young, 30 years old, and obviously, like you said, battling those mental illnesses. And it was the day after he withdrew. He withdrew for an illness, and then the next day took his life. And it is crazy to think about. You got someone who's doing big things in most people's eyes and out in the public eye, and thinking they got it all together, and they're playing golf at a high level, and they're owning their craft, they're fulfilling their destiny and their dreams and everything that they're doing. But yet here you are with something they're just battling with internally that no one knows about. And so you're right. I think it's important reminder to check in on those who are always looking great and always looking happy, and the ones that are looking successful. I think it's cool that we do a lot of that within our mastermind group. I know guys check in on guys a lot, and I think that's been a big a big thing for us over the last few years, is that happens often. And I think the world needs more of that. And even if you've got a close buddy or close friend, or even if they're not close and you haven't seen them in a while, but they're in your circle and they look like they're, posting pictures online and it's happy with their family and all this stuff, that doesn't mean anything. Right. And I think that's what, Grayson kind of proved, is that what you see in the public eye doesn't always mean what's truly going on internally. And super sad story, man. Yeah, that was that shook the golf world pretty good.
And I think that we've gotten a lot of feedback about how, this podcast is a positive light and the other stuff that we're working on in our personal time. But it's also a reminder that life is difficult. Like it gets hard, and we know that. We don't go down that route as much. I mean, when we talk about the really deep, dark challenges, and maybe there's a whole episode on that in regard to mental health. But if you're struggling with it, I think that's one of the things that Grayson was telling people a lot is reach out and ask for help. Get a medical professional if it need be. You do not have to do this alone. There's no shame in it. Life's hard, and having the tools in your toolkit and talking to people is really step one, just to relieve that weight and struggles. So please reach out if you need resources. Reach out to us. We'd be happy to help.
That was like in the golf. Speaking with sticking with the golf industry, the tournament before that, Scotty Scheffler has a little run in with some cops leading up to his round, and it was like, what? When I saw the headlines, you see the mugshot and the headline, you're like, Scotty Scheffler arrested. Like, what did that guy do? Like, he's like poster boy, good old boy type of player. And then, you kind of see what happened, and it wasn't really that big of a deal, but it was still something that affected his round and affected, the area, getting arrested. And I don't know. What's your take on it?
Yeah, it was definitely on my list to bring up as well, because you said it well. Scotty Scheffler, for those of you that aren't real golf fans or golf fans that have been living under a rock, Scheffler's having a career year.
World number
to
one.
The point. Oh, yeah, world number one.
Multiple weeks in a row.
Just major championships out the wazoo, and he's really given a lot of the credit. He's almost been too perfect from the press, so I was just giving it up to God, saying that he's given a platform. And I mean, quite honestly, I haven't picked it up in a while, but he had me considering reading the Bible the way he's playing golf. But when that news came through, literally the last person you'd think you'd see a mugshot of, and there was a misunderstanding on transport to the golf tournament. Unfortunately, someone had passed away. A pedestrian was struck while walking, which is what created the traffic that he was driving around as he was instructed to do to get to the golf course. A cop told him to stop. He thought there was a misunderstanding and he was waving him on, but wound up pulling him out of the car, taking him to jail. Very embarrassing and really unnecessary in the greater scope of things when you're dealing with a fatality. Anyway, long story short, he winds up making bail, making his tee time by an hour. He got back to the course with about an hour to spare, birdies the first hole. He did not win the tournament, but he was up, made the cut, and I think he finished like in 20s or 30s, but either way, you know that your conscience must be clear when you're shooken up like that. You were just put in the orange jumpsuit in the clinger, and you come out and you're able to jump back in and birdie the first hole. Like, what type of focus and compartmentalization is that?
Yeah, that's wild. I read that he's got his morning routine before he gets to the first tee, or before his warm up and his stretches and whatever he does. And he started all of that from the jail cell because he's like, this is when I got to start it. And I know I'm getting out of here because, in his eyes, it was like, this is a little nutty. But, he started all that in his jail cell, got out there on the first tee, or did his warm-ups, got on the first tee and birdied it. And, yeah, like I say, he started – I think it kind of wore out. Like, that probably was an adrenaline high day of just, like, playing – he played really well. And then I think it probably caught up to him. Because that's just something that doesn't happen to you. And it's, very often, if you're a guy like Scotty Scheffler, and it's like, it's probably just taken by surprise. You don't know how you're supposed to act. You don't, it's like, what the heck? Like, what did I just go through? And even though it was not many hours or, far worse things that could have happened, but him to bounce back like that, you're right, compartmentalizing and preparation. He was like, screw it, I'm going to continue to prepare like I'm going to get out there. I don't know if I'm going to get out there, but when I do, I'm going to be ready to roll. But yeah, I think that's part of being an athlete, though, and part of being a professional or being an entrepreneur or whatever. Like, you have to be able to compartmentalize things that are a little bit out of your control, and things that come at you that can be heavy is, take care of what you need to take care of. But if you've got a mission and you got things going on, and you got to figure out how to continue pushing forward. And so I think that was a good reminder there from good old Scotty.
I know I'm rereading Winning by Tim Grover. I know we talk about Relentless a lot and Tim Grover a lot, and I'm unapologetic about it because his work is such a good reminder for me. And the way he talks about pressure being a privilege, like we get it all the time, busy, so much on the plate, et cetera, all that. It's a privilege, and reframing it, it helps. And that privilege only comes from those who earn it. And the way when he talks about mental toughness is like winning makes you different. And Scheffler's there right now. He is winning and winning and winning in every aspect. And for him to go through that, jump back in and compete and contend, it's literally showing that what you're capable of and what you can handle from a mental perspective, that capacity's increased. And I'm sure he was a little bit surprised with it too. I meant to catch his caddy, Ted Scott's Sunday sermon that he rolls every week, because I'm sure it was a good one, but I missed it. So I'll have to circle back to that, maybe include it in the show notes.
Yeah, and there's also like when you haven't even won yet, that winning mentality, that is a good book. Obviously, Tim Grover is a trainer for Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, and there is a guy in the NBA right now. Going back to the T-Wolves, there are people that are comparing Anthony Edwards to the likes of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. The dude's 22 years old, and he's putting in the work and showing the world what he can do. And he hasn't won anything yet, but he's got that winning mindset. And you can tell as soon as he steps on the floor that he's there to dominate you, and he'll do whatever it takes. And I bet you he ends up winning a bunch of championships in his career. It doesn't look like it'll happen this year, but still hanging on by a thread. We'll see. But I think
he's taking games on his shoulders. You brought him up to my attention, and when you were telling me about how he's just literally taking games over, because it's what the Suns didn't have this year, maybe a few times over the course of the year. But that perspective had me watching him a little bit more. The way you were saying, he would literally just go on a streak and say, "Give me the ball, I'll make it happen." And that's the cleaner mentality that you were talking about. And I've been enjoyed watching him ever since you brought him to my attention.
Yeah, and going through like his pre-draft combine and whatnot, he was Steve Kerr was a guy that he was working with, and he's the one that kind of motivated him to work harder and all that. And he wasn't like a super well-known guy coming out of Georgia in college, but he's coming into the scene, and I think he just sees all the greats and just wants to be one of those types of guys, and he plays like them and whatnot. But again, winning is a mindset. Going back to that book, and that's what Tim Grover talks about. It is an absolute mindset, and having that positivity in your day and focused on, I will win the day every single day. That's what drives success and happiness. Now, there are some dark sides to that and some cons to that, where if you don't win your day, if you're going to beat yourself up about it, that's up to you. But I think that giving yourself some grace along the way is super important to remember. But when you can wake up today and feel like I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday, that's what winning's all about, no matter where you are in your craft, whether you're an NBA player or, you're, working, a 9-to-5 type job. So either way, focus on winning, having that mindset. We can learn a lot of that from sports and athletes and whatnot, those guys that have that drive, the Tom Brady's of the world, and, all of those types of greats in other sports too.
Another individual that was given the prestigious cleaner title was Tom Brady by Tim Grover. And I think everyone would agree Brady's a total cleaner.
Yeah.
And
did you see his roast?
He was just put on a roast.
Yeah.
And I have not seen it. You've seen the full thing. I've seen a lot of the clips and got some of the clip notes. We're going to watch it at some point. But when you talk about mental fortitude and being just really secure with yourself, especially given what he has on the radar, you have to have that mindset and that mental toughness if you're going to put yourself out there like that. What was it like?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was hilarious. Kevin Hart hosted it, and I love Kevin Hart. I mean, anything that guy does, I just freaking laugh out loud. His expressions are ridiculous. But I mean, it's definitely R-rated. It's not anything you want to watch around the kids. There's a lot of nasty jokes and, cuss words and whatnot, but it was funny. But I will say that there were some points that, kind of took it to another level, took it a little personal. Tom Brady, he held his own during the roast, but afterwards, I know he said that he did kind of regret that because of what it did. Some of that came back to his family and all that kind of stuff, because, the personal side came out with him and Giselle, and, they're him wanting to play one more year or whatever, right? I don't know the story, the ins and outs of, he's not on my text speed dial, so I don't know all of that. But the roast was really funny, and they had guys coming in that talked a lot about the Patriots and their dynasty. They had Belichick even come out. Robert Kraft was there, and they did Gronk got him to do a shot together, which those guys have major beef now, I guess, is Belichick and Robert Kraft. And so, like, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but it was an interesting evening to bring back a lot of those memories of those Patriots. But, to talk about some, other crazy things like Aaron Hernandez, right? Like, he was a murderer, right? And went to prison, and then he ended up killing himself. And, like, it's insane some of the situations that those guys are in. And that actually got brought up in the roast, and it was almost like made a joke. I didn't enjoy that part. I was like, why did we need to bring this part up? But it was part up. It was brought up. So if you watch it, be prepared for that. But anyway, Tom Brady held his own on the roast and took it like a champ, because they got him pretty good with his chiseled chin and robot body, and he's not even a real human type of aspect.
Yeah, comedy's interesting to me. I talk about it with my brother-in-law a lot, about how we're in this state where, what's politically correct and what can you say and what can you not. And comedians, really what their role is to take a perception of the world that's, factual, and put a perspective on it to show the flawed thinking of humans and how we show up. And that can cross lines, because most comedians, there are no rules. They're trying to actually put a truth filter on what's going on in the world. And that's a tough line these days. It really is, on what you can and cannot say, because it used to be all bets are off. You can't, comedians kind of had license to kill. Yeah. In that. And nowadays it's kind of like, oh, I don't know if you can say that, but it's funny. Do I laugh? And anyway, my biggest thing was to have the security to put yourself out there like that is a whole different level of mental fortitude. Again, we're talking about people that have perspectives that they've already achieved. So there's a little bit less risk. They've let their actions show for themselves. And I'm sure Tom is pretty confident in his character, which is what a roast, if you have that, you can survive the other stuff. But thought that was interesting. Yeah,
it's funny you bring up the comedian thing, because we just did you heard of Matt Rife? Have you heard of him? You seen his Netflix special? So Matt Rife is a comedian. He's like 28 years old or something. He's like a TikTok viral guy. Like, he went bonkers on TikTok, funny guy. Just in the last 2 years has blown up in the comedy world. He was the youngest guy to sell out the Hollywood Bowl. But he's a raunchy dude. Like, he crosses those lines, and you cannot have a camera or a video. You can't record anything at his shows. Like, they're really strict about it. Kevin Hart did the same thing. We've seen Kevin Hart live in comedy as well. And they got people walking around the arena. Like, if you got your phone out, they will kick you out of the place. Like, they don't want anything recorded. And I used to think that it was partly because they just don't want you to like record it and share it on social media to ruin their bits. But Matt Rife was saying, I don't want you to record something that I'm saying that's taken out of context, because you didn't film the first 2 minutes of the joke. Like, you just filmed the punchline that looks like I'm a real shitty person, which, these right. And so it made a lot of sense, but they do have,
you got to tell the whole story.
Exactly. And on social media now, you can just pick whatever clip you want to make someone look like a disaster. When in reality, the whole story is not there. But Matt Rife is another funny guy. If you've never heard of him, he's got a Netflix comedy special, but again, not G-rated. You have to have an open mind. If you don't like that type of stuff, I did not recommend it. We're just talking about it.
I like it. Well, I think that's our sports episode on the SuccessFlow podcast for this time. Would hone in on some of the highlights, like mainly around your mental health and how are you feeling as a human and being comfortable in your own skin. If there's any issues going on there, talk to somebody. Get around your crew that lifts you up, and keep on that journey of success and defining it for yourself. We'll be at you next week.